But anyway, that's different. And we're live. This is John Reed, Enterprise Hits and Misses video debut of Josh Greenbaum. How we doing?
I'm good, thanks. Nice day. It's Friday. Good to chat with you.
Yeah, we've got a little happy hour action going here, which is great. There's a few auspicious things about this occasion. And by the way, if anyone has been wondering where are John's female guests, they're coming. They're coming. They have just proven a little hard to nail down lately. I don't know why, but that's going to get solved.
Hard to get, John. Sorry.
It does happen. But this is also, yes, I have a new microphone. I'm still fine-tuning it. Let's not talk about that. It doesn't matter. You can hear me. Hi, Thomas. Great. Hi, Thomas. Welcome to the show. I know you'll have some good comments on this one. And guess what, folks? This is also a debut of a new show format that I'm going to use sometimes. This is not the countdown format. So surprise, surprise. This is different. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. It's either going to be like blogs that matter or blogs you should have read instead of wasting time on Facebook, you moron, or blogs that advance the conversation or something like that. But Josh, for a few years now, you've had very productive, what my high school history teacher called bone of contention, which I love that phrase. You've had a bone of contention around a few topics that coalesce around this notion of extreme heterogeneity, if I can pronounce it right.
Heterogeneity.
And thank you. Okay. I'm going to get that right by the end of this broadcast.
Got it.
And why that's such a problem for customers and the way that vendors approach it, essentially with their heads in the sand. And so we're going to talk about that today. And this goes back to a couple posts that you've done, and I'm going to be putting them into the chat as well. You started, you may have more on this theme, but you had a really good one on LinkedIn about the myths of account control, which is another big factor here. And then earlier this year, you wrote a very interesting post on customer success, vendor empathy, and the problem of extreme heterogeneity. So tell us, Josh, like what is driving these posts?
Well, what's driving these posts is really, I think the head in the sand is sort of a good metaphor. Then, one of my aphorisms is the biggest mistake, and it's in there. The biggest mistake vendors often make is that they try to sell product the way they develop it, not the way it's consumed by the customer. Right. And the sort of extreme version of that is it comes out of the sweet vendor who's got, good ERP plus lots of other LOB, and their ticket to digital transformation, to innovation, to everything is a one-way ticket through their products and nothing else. And so, you want to be modern and new and, all that good stuff. Just buy one of everything from us and, move everything out, move the old stuff out, move the new stuff in. And of course, that just doesn't wash with most large enterprises. There is no such thing as, I shouldn't say no such thing. It's very rare that a company is going to go wall to wall with one vendor. In fact, it's extremely rare. What's more often the case is that there's just this big, hodgepodge of technology, products, infrastructure, and advocates and influencers for all those individual pieces. And that's realities. That's how it is. That's the heterogeneity, the extreme heterogeneity of the market. If you're not talking to that, if you're not helping customers with that, if you're not acknowledging that's the lives they live, then you're really not on the customer side. You're just on, on your investor side. I hate to say it, more than your customers. That's the wrong way to go about it, in my view.
Yeah, and I think you make a really important point too, which is as you move up market, this problem gets worse, which is not to say that there aren't some complex mid-sized and smaller companies that run into the same issue. But in the piece I put in the chat, you talk about this extreme heterogeneity is more the norm than the exception. Particularly among companies with annual revenues that top $1 billion. These companies may have at one point a standardized set of or suite or best of breed applications, but as to your point, they merged and acquired, they divested, they reinvested, they reorganized, and the standardization of IT just went out the friggin' window.
Yeah, and business process, and I mean, there's yes. By the way, John, I've just had recently 2 conversations. One with Rainer Zeno over at SAP, who runs their mid-market practice. And then I talked this morning with Unit 4, who's obviously more of a mid-market company as well. I'll correct myself. It's not necessarily just a large enterprise problem. Both of these folks, we talked extensively about the heterogeneity. in the mid-market as well. It's of course scaled down, but as we all know, that's the mid-market. Smaller problems, but the scope and the breadth of the problems often are very similar.
Yeah, I think I just made the point because I do run into some smaller companies that are able to successfully run their enterprise on like one suite of products and stuff. But things get complex like sooner than you think. I think that's one of the ways of looking at this. And I want to go back to your original LinkedIn post on this, because what we're going to do, audience, and you can chime in anytime with your questions and comments on this I think very pivotal issue for customers. We're going to walk through some of the thinking behind it. So essentially, we're going to dwell on the problem for a while, and then we're going to move into like some things on what can be done about it. And Greg, you know all about this. Greg works for a major ERP customer. Vendors do a poor job of showing how heterogeneity or complexity provides value. Or how they can work within that context. I mean, one of the things Josh and I were talking about off camera is how few vendors voluntarily show their integrations with other preferred products that may be from their competitors. Thomas wants to ask if complexity does add value. Whoops, sorry, wrong comment. And that's a little bit of a side discussion we can get into.
I mean, the quick answer, Thomas, is it can. If you play, because your alternative is that complexity, runs you into the ground. So, but yeah.
Well, I would say that customers are certainly insulted when they're told to run simple when they know they have a complicated business. So we know that just from history.
Right.
But then there's some levels of complexity that I think are truly the enemy of good processes. I want to read something from your LinkedIn post. That you published a couple years ago. You said, ironically, hyperscalers are more like the on-prem vendors than cloud-native vendors. So you take a shot at the hyperscalers too. And I think that's important because a lot of these problems do end up offloaded into cloud workloads. And none of them seem to acknowledge that same issue, despite the myriad apps that run in the clouds by individual customers or other hyperscalers. And you say, go ask your hyperscaler to provide a single pane of glass to manage that diverse portfolio they're running in the cloud, and after they blink a few times, they'll most likely shrug. Ask them to help manage integrated workloads running on other hyperscalers, and they'll scoff as well. And what you go on to say, which I think is a really important point, is that this lack of focus on heterogeneity demonstrates a remarkable lack of empathy on the part of these vendors. So say more about all of that.
What can I say? It's whose interests are you really there for? And if you're not really, as a vendor, if you're not trying to make your stuff work, despite heterogeneity or within the context of heterogeneity, then you're really not listening to what the customer's problem is. And particularly as we move into an era where the term end-to-end process or digitally transforming core processes becomes a norm. If you as a vendor don't consider the fact that maybe your customer, whatever you're doing, whatever brilliant thing you do in ERP, whatever brilliant thing you can do in your core, if you think the customer is going to drop an important standard vendor app and function that has a big constituency in that company, in order for them to adopt your vision, you're kind of making it up here. I mean, these vendor silos within companies have their own advocates and influencers. They have their own, I refer to it in the more recent one, it's sort of a city-state model. They're all kind of advocating, I'm the Oracle guy, I'm the SAP guy, I'm the Salesforce guy, I'm the Workday guy. We're trying to build our careers and our influence, so we're going to try to get what they've got going. The smart vendor walks into that and says, okay, well, I'm here to change your ERP, and okay, so you're running Salesforce. That's not my product. In fact, they're my competitor on the CRM side, but that makes you happy. Let's talk about that. And maybe, God willing, I'm going to show you such a great thing about my ERP and this other CRM. And the next time that CRM comes up for renewal, maybe we'll have a different conversation. That's to me the customer-centric view. It doesn't happen a whole lot.
Well, I think so, right? And I think vendors have to think about a juxtaposition of two strategies. One is to expand their footprint as ruthlessly as possible, no matter what, of their own products. And the other is to become the most trusted advisor for the strategy that particular customer is trying to implement, right? And sometimes that might mean their products, and sometimes it might not, but it means that I trust you as my go-to for your industry. And I would say in particular, the ERP vendors have some pressure there because they're increasingly be perceived as sort of a back office relic. And their job is not just to get the ERP upgraded, but to show that they understand what the customers need. But every type of vendor, no matter what category, I think, is in this same boat.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, I totally agree. I think that obviously it's more acute if you're a suite vendor and you've got a breadth of product functionality. But you're Workday or Salesforce, you walk into an organization, very often it's not just one HCM, it's not just one CRM, it's not just one process that's run entirely within your software. You've got to also play well with others. Definitely.
Yep. Just want to say quick hi to Geogene. I don't think I've seen you in the chat before. I know you've listened before. Welcome to the live version, and feel free to chime in. Glad to have you here. Thomas and Greg are having an extensive discussion on complexity in the chat, which I encourage, by the way. Go at it with each other. There's some good points here. I'm not going to hit on all of them now, but I will put Greg's point is. Anyway, Greg is basically speaking to large IT footprints.
Yeah,
he lives that world. I want to go on, Josh, to a couple points that came up in the comments on your LinkedIn post. One of which was from a major ERP shop that said he 100% agrees that many of the policies the large vendors adopted in the hopes of expanding their footprint are actually having the reverse effect, which is kind of what you and I were just talking about, is that the end result of that behavior is the deterioration of trust. But then Thomas Wellgum from ASUG made a comment, which I think is really important, which is, isn't there an API for all of this, Josh? Because I think where a lot of vendors leave this right now is, well, we have a nice set of APIs, so you're okay. What is your reaction to that?
Sure. There's always a technological solution to it. The question, and yeah, I mean, if you don't have an API strategy, if you don't have an ability to connect, you're living in the 20th century. But that's not enough. And to me, that's a difference between empathy and just mailing it in, frankly. If all you say is, yeah, okay, we understand there might be this complexity that we don't handle, but okay, just call your SI and get some API stuff done. That's not, again, listening to the customer. That's not understanding the problem. They typically want more than just a technological solution. And particularly when what you want to do in a world, again, of next generation end-to-end processes is you want to be able to sit down with that line of business owner and show them how their job changes and innovates, and make that as out of the box as possible, even if that box is actually underneath is 3 or 4 different boxes. That's more than just saying there's a bunch of APIs and get someone to wire them together. You want to show how that process orchestrates, moves through from one part of the process to the other. That's not just a bunch of APIs. That has to do with a lot more understanding and empathy for the customer experience, for what the user actually is going to go through. Not just, it's not just a back end problem.
Yeah, I'd like to get your comment, Josh, on Greg's point here. You might argue that hyperscalers have a vested interest accommodating heterogeneity, more services and differentiation of VPC processes, services make more billings. What do you think of that?
I'm waiting for one of those hyperscalers to stand up and say, hey, we'll take care of this for you. I think it's a brilliant idea. I mentioned, there are ways to existing market structure can deal with these, and certainly either the hyperscalers or the systems integrators, to a certain extent, they do that already. But the hyperscalers have an opportunity to say, yeah, we will give you that single pane of glass. I just don't see them doing it right now. I don't know, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been waiting for that. And, particularly as a cloud native lifecycle management kind of tool, doesn't exist. Not that I've seen.
Right. And one of the things that I think is difficult is I think you need a real industry advisor to help you to sort through which aspects of your diverse landscape should remain diverse and which should be simplified and consolidated. And I think the risk you have with the hyperscalers is they're just going to say, hey, give us your workloads.
Yeah,
we'll take all of them. We don't care how complex and messed up they are and how inefficient you ultimately are. We'll just send you a bill.
Right. And certainly it's in their interest not to do that. I mean, that's the problem, is that it's in a lot of people's interest to allow complexity to remain, and to allow this confusion and difficulty and problem to continue, because there's money to be made in it. The moment you start, and so I had an interesting conversation with Unit 4 today about this, when they're coming out with their new ERPX, and they want to go to market with a real vision that this stuff is built in, that we as Unit 4 understand that we have an ERP for you. We think it's a great ERP. It may not be the only thing you run. Here's a strategy for doing that. I'm seeing that mentality come out more and more. I think maybe this drum I've been beating on is some people are hearing about it, but it's hard to make that change.
And the next phase in your argument is very interesting, because what you do is you throw a huge helping of cold water onto the idealized notion of customer success. And how that fits into the picture here is that what you essentially say is that vendors are essentially taking this nice notion of, we have a stake in your project after go live and into the future, and twisting it into a means of succeeding with our products. And I just want to read from your blog, because I think this is like pretty devastating, if I can actually get back and find it. Let me just see if I could get there. This will be worth it, folks, so just give me a minute. One sec. Yes. So this lack of focus on heterogeneity demonstrates a remarkable lack of empathy on the part of all these vendors. This is from Josh's LinkedIn post from a couple years ago, and provides further evidence that an ethically bankrupt sales culture that favors making quota over genuine customer success has been driven so deep into the enterprise software market that it's almost taken for granted that this is how the vendors roll. That needs to stop. Boom.
Boy.
Wow, Josh.
And I stand by that.
Wow.
Well, look at all the, you can just go on, we can do this soapbox all day long. I mean, customer success, the opposite is customer failure. Look at all the deals that happen, that don't succeed. And at the bottom of it is the fact that something's been oversold and something's been underdelivered. And, these companies, unfortunately, have really been marching to the quarterly drum of Wall Street, and not the definitely not quarterly drum of customer success. It's just, this is why, you run into companies like Zoho who say, we're just not going to live by Wall Street's cadence. And you think, gosh, that's refreshing, because the opposite is, I got a quota this quarter, and I'm going to do whatever discount I have to make. I heard the other day that, some cloud vendors are giving their channel partners the opportunity to put in an 80% discount, in a quarter to make the bucks. Jeez, what, that just is an invitation for abuse, and it becomes abusive.
Yes, and we have a comment from Sidanshu. Welcome. Great point. Invested interest in the status quo. He's kind of getting into the solution part of this now, what to do about the problem. As with health, there needs to be clear vision and accountability of what goals and key performance indicators that will be tracked. It's funny he should mention that, Josh, because that's something you have been working on for a little while.
Yeah, boy, Sid, thanks a lot. You teed up another 2-hour conversation. But, fundamentally, this is about changing the concept of how do you measure customer success, and what is customer success? What's the definition? And the problem is fundamentally one of accountability and transparency. You need extreme transparency in these projects in order to make sure that they're going the right way. And if you don't do that, the tendency is, again, got to make quota, got to make the quarter, you're going to cover stuff up. And the headlines are replete with examples of that. It's not the sales culture behind enterprise software has not been the healthiest aspect of the industry. Let me say that. I don't even know why I sugarcoated it like that.
Yes, exactly. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what needs to change. And let's take every different constituent group and look at how they can help be a part of a better approach here. Let's start actually with customers, Josh. What do you think customers, CXOs, CIOs, managers, decision makers, how should they think about this in a way that can be more useful to their projects and less playing into the hands of these sales tactics?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of complex answers to it. I think that at the end of the day, there has to be a bigger sense of both of individual responsibility on the customer to shepherd these these vendor selection, these implementation processes, these post go live processes in a way that really is designed to be successful and to not defer too much to the partners. You need to have a real strong sense that while you're trust but verify. Maybe I'll use an old post Cold War idea. I think that the end user community in general, unfortunately, is also part of what I call the culture of mediocrity. I say a lot that this has been going on for years and years for my entire career. That's true for the buy side as well, and the buy side is inured, if you will, to some of the problems as well. It's been standard operating procedure. They have to change their mentality. I think also, I think end user community in general, both on the line of business as well as in the C-suite specifically, needs to really hold these folks accountable. It's not. I want to, from my vendor, I want you to don't come in and tell me that it's every problem I can solve is wall to wall your software. Come in and tell me how to solve my problems. And I think the other side for the end user community is, you need to really enforce discipline internally on your people, but also on your partners as well, vendor and the SI that's coming in there. You just give them carte blanche, and the tendency will be to take it to your detriment.
Right. Thomas, we'll get to your points in a second. I just want to add to what Josh said. In my mind, Josh, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I see three big things. One is what you hit on mostly, which is customers taking more ownership and accountability for their own projects, even if they do have external partners. And then the second is something I sometimes just call come up for air more often. And I would put two pieces in that. One is what we just had in the comment thread by Sudhanshu around coming up with more frequent health checks and metrics around your ongoing projects and your own customer satisfaction, and knowing how to measure that in a way that works for you and your organization, and being able to do that much more regularly. Because a lot of these projects that unwind and eventually make terrible headlines, one of the things that always stands out is how long it took them to realize that things were going crappy, and coming up for air sooner certainly would have helped. And the second part of that, I think, is of coming out for air is being better networked and having a better understanding of how your peers in your industry are coping with these same problems. I mean, I've lost track of how many times it shows. The best times that I have are just watching customers sitting around sharing war stories and seeing light bulbs go off, and me thinking to myself, this was worth thousands of dollars for you to do this. Not hearing the blasted keynotes, nothing else, but just having those peer-oriented sessions. And while it's harder to do that online, it can still certainly happen. And you can do that one-on-one on LinkedIn too. But I just noticed a big distinction between certain customers that want to be a part of broader communities and more that have their heads down. And I find the latter group really gets into trouble.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't want to take responsibility, it's like having kids. You want to just let the teacher raise your children. They're going to educate them. That's good. Hopefully they're professionals and they know how to do a better job than you do. But you need to be in the game as well. And this has been what's been a little disappointing for me. As you know, John, I've had this tool out in the industry for a while called ProQ that measures project success. It's meant to be a transparency and accountability tool. And a lot of people are scared of it because a lot of people, as horrible it is that there are billions of dollars wasted on these projects. Change, that kind of change is complicated. It's difficult. We don't necessarily like.
It's like I take my annual physical, not a monthly physical. It's like
not that kind of physical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No doubt. All right.
But the painful ones are what save you. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Thomas says avoidance of departmental technology decisions would already go a long way. Reduction of shadow IT. That's obviously a piece of the puzzle, right? Is proliferation of decision making is part of the challenge of owning modern landscapes.
Yeah. Well, and that means, should we talk about the other guys now? IT, if IT is not aligning with business in that proverbial way we've been talking about our entire careers, then they're not delivering what the business needs or wants, and that's a big reason why shadow IT exists.
Thomas wonders about enterprise architecture in this context.
Well, absolutely. The problem, maybe Thomas will explain this, but to me, an enterprise architect tends to be someone who specializes in one product, or at least those are the ones I know. So to the extent that profession also takes a heterogeneous viewpoint, even if you're fundamental, and which I think is important. If you are an SAP enterprise architect, it behooves you to understand what that means in the context of your use of, non-SAP software at a very high level. So when the question comes up in the room, your answer is, well, if your answer is we have an API for that, you're missing the boat. It has to be stronger than that.
Indeed. And Greg just makes a comment of an agility based on a set of health checks, the agile. Yeah, Greg, you can maybe come up with the acronym, what each letter will stand for, and we can go out and brand it together. But there is something to it. And you said also, Greg, that's the value of the conferences that is impacted by the pandemic. I would agree with that completely, but I would also say that that's not an acceptable excuse for allowing these things to slack off either. Like I know that if you work hard, you can get some of the same experiences online, but it's not going to land in your lap. And certainly vendors aren't going to provide that for you for the most part at their shows, which I've written about extensively on diginomica.com. Shameless plug time. But you can still take your own initiative around that and form your own sort of peer groups. And I would argue that you should, because even during conferences, the problem with that was losing touch with people in between those shows. So you would have these revelatory conversations and then go back. And I think what's really necessary going forward is that constant, that so-called continuous loop of like whatever, you're always in touch with people and getting those gut checks. Yeah. And Greg wants to ask, go ahead, Josh, you go first.
No, I was just going to emphasize that is, that should be part of your job. That should be in your job description, is making those connections and not just living in your own, cloistered world.
But Greg asks, do most enterprises have the fortitude to really look at value-based IT projects and the willingness to pull the plug when one moves into the sunk cost land? Ouch. Josh, that's a tough one, man. Well, there's your culture of mediocrity, eh?
Culture of mediocrity, and it meets the culture of we don't measure jack. The irony, I can't tell you how many times, I've been asked, let's do a big ROI study on our software, blah, blah, blah. And I say, great, ROI study. Okay, so find a customer who's done the before measurements so we can look at the after measurement and do the ROI and then, see you later. That, the metric driven life is still one that is not is not overlapped into the professional services, into the kind of, work that needs to be done. So it's hard to have that. It's hard to say, here's the value, because, clearly, right, the value is regulatory, requirements. That's a value. You're out of business if you can't meet the latest FDA manufacturing, good manufacturing requirements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the true, again, I always ask this. You and I do this all the time. Here we have this great migration strategy. Here's how we're going to do it from a technology standpoint. Beautiful. Okay, so how do you tell the customer? What do you tell the customer about the value they get from this migration?
Absolutely. And data and analytics are a big part of that. And the one thing I will say, and I want to make clear that I'm not a technological optimist in my worldview. I don't subscribe to the idea that technology makes the world better as we go. But I do believe that enterprise technology has improved in many ways. And I just posted a use case on Diginomica today, shameless plug number 2. It's not a Diginomica partner or anything like that. It's just one I liked from good data about a customer. There's TransTrack and how they supported public transit companies during a pandemic. But it was all about, I was ready to stump this guy and say, well, what about external data sources? And he's like, oh yeah, we're making decisions based on weather data and health data and all this stuff. And I was thinking to myself, 10 years ago, I never would have heard that. And so I do think, and there was a lot of discussion in that around the single source of truth and how trusting the numbers is so important in making decisions. And I do think we've gotten better at a lot of the software part. And I think in many cases, the software is not the problem anymore, but that doesn't mean the problem's going away, right? Because you can't throw software on top of culture and data silos and make it work. So
yeah, well, software at the end, I mean, my take on this, and this is self-serving because I don't do this kind of analysis anyway. My take is that if you're down in the feature functionality level, worrying about whether you've got the right vendor, then you're really sort of not thinking about the other problem, the harder problem, which is how do you handle the change management? How do you handle the people side of what you're going to do?
Right.
Very different.
Oh, and Greg was referencing like a Friday afternoon video party with John and Josh. Greg, you're kind of onto my game. I want to have a lot of fun on Fridays, but also dig into some very like gritty issues about projects, because I really think that ultimately our job in the enterprise is to create better projects together. And I think we're not doing a good enough job at that. And so it's time to bear down.
Yeah.
So Josh, let's talk a little bit before we wrap up on this formal part of the discussion on the role of the vendor. We talked some about this. I think we've agreed that APIs are required but are not enough. You made a good point in your piece, which we've also touched on a little bit, around like just being more open and acknowledging that the universe doesn't begin and end with your products is a big part of the puzzle as well. What are you looking for from vendors? What would constitute progress on this issue?
Well, to me, the dream presentation is the one in which the vendor shows me an end-to-end process that spans their software and somebody else's software. In fact, not just one, but multiple different products, and how they make everybody better in the way. Now, I mentioned Unit 4. They're coming out with a new version of their ERP. They're going to market with this idea and they just showed me a few slides this morning that really acknowledge this, there it is in the slide where if you're Salesforce, if you Workday, you've already produced the slide where that says, here we are, we live in this heterogeneous environment, because you can't, Salesforce, particularly when you get to some of the, the execution side, the transactional side of sales, you need ERP, you need all kinds of stuff. You need payroll, HR, you got to do a lot of stuff. So they get it. But even then, they pretend that they pretend it's simple. I think that's a big part of it. They pretend it's easy. And they sell it, they sell a bill of goods. And that I think needs to stop, definitely. Let's be honest and transparent. It's hard. But the value in success is very high.
Yes. So Sudan asks, do you think market condition and the impact of the pandemic requires companies to transform to survive, as there will continue to be more disruption?
I think, Sudan, you're talking about end user organizations, not vendors. And I'll take a shot at that real quick. Supply chains are in such disruption right now. What we just saw in the Suez Canal, fascinating, story about how the old model just got literally ran down, ran up on a shoal and couldn't budge for a very painful long time. Everyone is rethinking supply chains. If you try to buy a bicycle recently, you'll know it's damn hard to do. That's going to change, and that's not a one-time change. This is a long-standing process. We love just-in-time. Forever, Deming and all those guys really helped us understand that's a part of the quality movement. We forgot about how hard supply chains are to maintain. So the continuous change that the pandemic has started will continue for a long time. We're going to have to really rethink how we do global business in the light of these vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. I think one interesting point that we're trying to better understand is, what will behavior flip back in some ways, and in other ways it won't. I had a fascinating conversation yesterday with a CEO about, will travel ever get back to what it once was, or will we, my hope is that we learn a lot of lessons from this time, and that we don't fall back on this lazy idea of, wouldn't normal be great, but that we figure out, hey, less travel was kind of good for the environment. It was kind of good for us. And
it was great.
Yeah. And to your point around supply chains, which I think is really interesting, which is maybe we should turn more to our local communities and look more at, or, whether it's organic farming or whatever it is. Like, I think one of the interesting takeaways from all of this is how people have, I think, tapped into desire to be more sustainable and not as dependent on far-flung regions, though I think some international cooperation is obviously important. But anyway, I think it's interesting to have those debates, and if we can have them, maybe this won't be for just naught,
Yeah, and I think when the supply chain problem is really just one component of a larger problem, which is at the end of the day, how do I source raw materials and deliver product to the customer? And that's got to change. That's already changing because the consumer side has been rapidly changing forever.
Absolutely.
Marine doesn't see a whole lot of rethinking happening in the wild. Oh, John and I are rethinking, and it sounds like
we're trying, Marine. Yeah, Marine. I think Marine. Let me just make a vague prediction that Marine may have more to say about this at a future edition of this show. Well, let's just leave that hanging for now as a little bit of a teaser. Yeah. By the way, Richard Pierre, probably butchered your last name. Sorry about that. It'd be great for a software company to actually sell solution versus software. But Richard, they've been selling solutions for a long time now. Haven't you kept up with the marketing literature? Come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on. We're selling solutions all the time. But no, it's a great point.
Because there's and I would say success. Let's sell success. And by the way, customer, you tell me what your definition of success is. Let me help you achieve that. Now, you don't want my definition as a vendor. I got investors. They're bothering me about this problem.
So, Josh, what do you think about this whole impact of blogging? Has the blogs that you've done on this, do you think, has it just been more of a cathartic spleen vent, or what effect does it have? Have you been able to take it forward in some way?
Cathartic spleen vent. That's brilliant. I'm seeing traction. I've been a consultant. We've been doing this for a long time. And I always say, the hardest thing about being a consultant is to have permission to even say something. There's a lot of people with a lot of good ideas. Being the person that they'll at least say, "What's your opinion?" is great. The true miracle is when they actually take some of that advice and act on it. And I think that's, I'm starting to see that. I think what I saw from Unit 4, I'd like to think is today is certainly part of that thinking. I've been seeing it in a lot of vendors' product descriptions now. It's hard to change that sales culture that's down at the bottom in the field, trying to just make quota and, with what they got. So I was ranting there. I missed what looked like a good exchange because someone.
People just commenting. It's good. It's nothing to really shift the focus at the moment. So do you think of blogging as an important component of your research? Because you also wrote a really good piece on the loneliness of the independent analyst, but folks like yourself and me that aren't part of the big shops, which, by the way, if you want a little good humor about the big shops, check out my April Fool's Day video with Brian, where we announced a competitor, the Quadrants and the Waves of the world. That was yesterday. If you want, I can post the video link if you didn't see it. But for us, Josh, we don't do these quantitative research. So how is it that you okay, I've had enough customer conversations, now it's time to put this out there? Is that kind of how your process works? Or
well, it's the good thing about being an independent, right, is that we can sort of pivot onto the big ideas as they emerge. So this is one that's just been really, I just hear all the time. I hear it. I think I mentioned it. There are these advocates, these siloed advocates of a particular vendor inside a customer want help with this, want to have and so, eventually, the critical mass builds, and I got to just spill my guts somehow. I don't blog a lot, but when I do, and that's we can have a long discussion about what is influence. I think this stuff has been influential. I think it's been, you've been amplifying it, and you've been talking about this as well. I think together, this zeitgeist is starting to really emerge as real. Look, at the end of the day, this is where it's going to go. Whether it happens now or later, these vendors are going to have to get more empathetic. They're going to have to get more on the customer side and not on the investor side. You can try and pretend this won't happen, and it won't until you're steamrollered by the folks who get it, because that's the next evolution. Look at what the Japanese automotive industry did to car manufacturing in the United States. Nobody, when I was growing up, I'm an old fart, nobody thought a car should last 100,000 miles. That wasn't, unless you were tinkering it by yourself. That never happened. Things change. Now you buy any old car, and if it can't hit 100,000, then that manufacturer has failed, and they know it. this is where we're going to go. We're going to get to the point where that relationship has to go 100,000 miles in the customer. You have to go that 100,000 miles in the customer's shoes and get it right.
I laughed and appreciated in the LinkedIn version of your piece where you hit on the myth of account control, because I think so much of this comes down to this illusion that we have, especially in the software world, that we can control the destinies of what happens in our so-called ecosystem, to use a word that
ecosystem, did you say?
Ecosystem, as Vinny Merchandani sometimes calls it. But I laughed when I saw it, because I was thinking about how vendors have tried to control people like you and have always struggled with it. And
you.
Well, yeah, right. And I think like that's the whole thing here, is that stop trying to control that which you cannot, and start thinking about the fact that, what does that mean that I can't control this anymore? Like, and how does my behavior need to change as a result of it?
Like I said, there are certain inevitabilities, and this empathy issue, this customer success issue is going to happen. And yes, and that's it. So what are you going to do? Again, you're going to be on the train, or you're going to get run over by the train. Guys like John and I, we can help you get on that train. That's what I try to do anyway.
Yeah. Richard says a question that underpins this conversation is around what will happen. What will the source of disruption be for software companies? It is very difficult for companies in an established industry to disrupt themselves. Yeah, I think that's true to some extent, Richard. But I do think that having a hard listen to the needs of your customers can be very important here. And the one thing I would say is that the software market continues to evolve. I've had some interesting conversations of late around this notion of legacy SaaS, which is this thing around that the SaaS model is getting kind of old in some ways, and in many ways it's repeating the same games, which if you want to see my video interview with the scorching interview with Adam from Upper Edge a couple of weeks ago, where he deconstructed the sales practices of SaaS companies, that's just kind of part of the puzzle, is customers awakening to this reality that maybe this isn't, maybe lock-in is still a really serious problem for me, and maybe I'm not really getting what I need from this. I'm getting more modern software, but I'm not necessarily getting a better experience, a better business relationship, a better result. And what I would say, Richard, is that if this generation of software companies doesn't deliver that, it does create an opening for those that will. And so I think we're going to continue to see that, as per Josh has mentioned today and mentions in the chats of some upstart companies that are growing right now that are trying to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, to me, so I was just talking to a couple of software execs with our friend Bonnie Tinder from Raven Intel about this exact problem. How do you disrupt the software industry? Well, I got an answer. We got an answer. You disrupt it by going after this issue of transparency and accountability. By stopping, don't pretend that I've got 97.5% customer sat because everything's beautiful, but actually say, as a matter of fact, this stuff's really hard. And, we're all going to struggle together, but we're going to make sure that every time we do a project with you, we're going to learn from it. We're going to improve it. We're going to make sure the partners improve. We're going to put this transparency and accountability out front, and that's our disruption. That to me would blow a lot of minds out there, because that sure as heck isn't being done now. All those customer success execs don't do that today.
Yeah, and Sudhanshu says many sexy SaaS solutions that have great UIs are forcing the legacies to improve the front end. I would agree with that, Sudhanshu, but I think to a large extent, in my opinion, that's already happened. And I think now some of those sexier SaaS solutions are being disrupted by cloud companies that are trying to do things fundamentally differently. And, we mentioned like Zoho and the fact that they're privately held. Zoho is a Diginomica partner, so I don't want you to think I'm doing this like for that reason, but because it came up earlier. Companies that are doing things dramatically differently. So, for example, simplifying contracts. There's an ERP company in the mid-market that charges based on consumption-based usage for the most part. Flexible licensing. They've also published a Bill of Rights. I'm not going to mention them because they're also a partner, and I don't want you to think I'm just pushing our partners. But the point is, there's going to be a lot of change, and I think a lot of that change is going to be not about pretty UIs, but about a deeper promise of a better way of doing business and a better way of doing projects. The one thing I will say is SaaS companies have reduced the cost of implementation to consulting, which has been a huge problem with like legacy on-premise software. They've done a pretty good job of that, but that's a cost reduction thing. That's not a business transformation thing. So
yeah, and it's not, I think you've traded one set of problems for another.
Yep.
And Maureen, 100%. Thank you. Keeping humans in the loop. Let me know when she shows up on the show. I want to be there in the front row.
Yeah, Maureen, I don't know. I think an intelligent blockchain powered post-sale support system with highly automated interactive chat would work awesome.
Yeah. Your sarcasm is
oh my goodness. There was this thing I added to our thing yesterday when we were announcing our technology trapezoid, where I said, vendors think that CIOs care about fairness and diligent vendor evaluations. They don't care about that. They want us to put all these vendors through an AI powered review and post it on a state of the art blockchain. That's what they want,
Yeah. Yeah, you can get me frothing at the mouth about blockchain.
Yeah. Josh is I think Josh might have even harsher feelings towards blockchain discussion than I do. By the way, Josh, blockchain talk is formally banned on this show. You might appreciate that. It's actually a rule of the show. But obviously, this is an exception because we're satirizing it, not putting it forth as an actual solution to real.
My favorite example, I have a friend who's a climate law expert, and he sent me one recently about a bunch of carbon credit people. They want to track carbon credits with blockchain. And if you know the carbon footprint of blockchain, try to track these offset credits using the most hideously, embarrassingly, carbon killing technology possible. Oh my God. It's just, my head starts to explode. So.
Yeah, it's almost like a circular pattern, right? Of the blockchain measuring its own consumption until it ultimately spins into infinity and self-destructs and takes us down with it.
Or we get on one of those exploding rockets that Elon Musk has to get the hell off the planet. We just burn to the ground on blockchain.
Yeah. I've always wanted to ask Musk if it might be worth saving our planet also, but I guess that's
I think when you get that rich, you realize it's probably not worth it. Let's get the hell out of here. Seems to be a lot of very rich guys who want to get off the planet.
Yeah, Greg, I'm not really worried about the blockchain messing with me, but we'll see. I've been writing a little bit about I've been writing a little bit about NFTs and hits and misses, but that's a little bit of a different thing. That's more for can visual artists find a way to make a living online, which is, I'm not saying NFTs are the solution to that, but it's a different problem than the enterprise problems.
Yeah, that's a good one. We'll talk about NFTs some other time too.
Yeah, I don't think you and I are the right, and I don't think we have the right audience for it either. Well, Josh, I promised you a half hour and I made you stay late. I'm sure you have other stuff to do. So
yeah, it's Friday afternoon at almost 2:00, and I got a lot of work.
Yeah. But I'm glad to have you on and to be able to share some of your views. By the way, folks, I have a prior podcast with Josh that goes into deeper detail on what causes project failure. So if you want some more of Josh, check out my Busting the Omni-Channel podcast archives. And you can hear, I think we were huddled in the bowels of some convention center.
We were down in Vegas, trying to get the guy changing the window to stop making noise.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that window guy was not respecting our podcast environment at all. It was
wow, harsh.
I was like, do you know who we are, man?
No.
He's like, no, I'm cleaning these friggin' windows, man.
Yeah, get out. I think Anyway,
I gotta move these color TVs. Money for nothing.
Yeah, blockchain is waiting me. Thank you, John, for having me on board.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. You can go ahead and sign off. I'm gonna shoot the shit with these chatters for a few more minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone,
for
paying attention and the questions, and catch you next time.
And that's it, folks. Anything you want to talk about in Thomas, we missed one of your questions. Sorry. Talking of pricing, how do you think vendors can be enticed to charge for value delivered, not for usage or similar? Well, it's a really good question. I mean, outcome-based models have gotten some traction, but unfortunately not nearly enough. I don't have a really good solution to that, actually. But I do think, Thomas, that the best solution for competition is more competition. The vendors that get the laziest are the ones that think they have the market cornered. And that's why it's such a problem in the large enterprise space, because it's harder and harder to disrupt the incumbent vendors in large enterprise contexts, in my opinion. So anyway, but you and I can do our part by trying to put forth more varieties of solutions and different considerations, and an end to golf course relationships is how I sometimes describe it. We should take those out to pasture permanently. I realize that's a naive goal, but hey, it's Friday. I can dream. A guy can dream. So yeah, folks, I've got some interesting guests I'm working on for coming weeks. So I'll try to keep the variety coming, and I'm sure I'll have Brian back on as well, because Brian was so full of vinegar in his deconstructing cloud ERP benefits slideshow. We're definitely going to have to see what other slides he has in the works. Any final comments or questions or suggestions before we wrap up? Otherwise, we will catch you next Friday. Greg, I don't know what a self-portrait NFT will go for today, but I would just say, throw it up on eBay and see how you do, and report back. Absolutely. I'm watching the chat for any final comments. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you guys. Have a great Easter weekend. Laters.